Hello everyone, welcome to this morning's Sutta class. We will start as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join in if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome to the second session of our mini-series, which is called Skillfully Building Your Dhamma Practice. So in this mini-series, we talk about different approaches to practice, different types of people, and also how there are different pathways on the practice path, different pathways to arahantship. And we explore this so people can figure out which types you are, and also which kind of practices are suitable for the different types, which kind of teachers teach things that are suitable for the different types, so that you can individually build your own Dhamma practice with practices that are suitable for you. And also just to acknowledge that people are individuals and that the practice path also needs to be individual, because there is not one path for everyone, but there are all these different pathways that the Buddha describes. And so last time we had a look at a sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya, and there the Venerable Ananda was talking about 4 different kinds of people that practice and that attain arahantship, so that go all the way to arahantship. And the one kind was a person who practices vipassana practices first, so who develops the wisdom practices first. And as a byproduct of wisdom practices, samatha also develops. And so this is a person who has a dominant wisdom faculty. Then there was another type of person who develops samatha practices first, so calmness, stillness of the mind, concentration practices first. And as a byproduct of those concentration practices, wisdom also develops. So this is a person who has a dominant samatha quality, a dominant concentration or samadhi faculty. Then there was a person who was somewhat in between, who was practicing both samatha and vipassana at the same time. And then the 4th kind of person was a person with a dominant faith quality. So this is a person who has a lot of faith in the practice, but their meditation isn't really going anywhere. They have neither strong wisdom qualities nor strong samadhi qualities. They have a lot of hindrances, but eventually there's an outside trigger and the mind converges and they make a breakthrough to the Dhamma. So we had a look last time at texts from the Theragatha and the Therigatha, so the verses of the monks and the verses of the nuns, where we saw testimonials of people who had this kind of practice, this faith-based kind of practice, where they had sudden breakthroughs instead of the usual gradual progress on the path. And today we are looking at a different sutta where we again encounter these types of people, the wisdom-based people, the faith-based people, and the samatha, the samadhi-based people. But we are looking at it from an entirely different angle. So hopefully this will be complementary. You will see that there are connections between the 2 suttas, but also that there's a lot more additional information that we get about those types today. So today we are reading the Kitagiri Sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya number 70. I have put a link in the live chat. And I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. And we're not going to read the entire sutta. We're only going to read a small passage where the Buddha describes 7 different kinds of people. And if you read from the printed book, then we will start reading at paragraph 14. If you're reading from the online version, then we are reading from the paragraph number SC22, which starts with the words bhikkhus. There are 7 kinds of persons to be found existing in the world. So hopefully you have found the passage now, and you can read along if you want. Of course, you can also read from Bhante Sujato's translation if you prefer that. So the sutta for today starts as follows. Bhikkhus, there are 7 kinds of persons to be found existing in the world. What 7? They are 1 liberated in both ways, 1 liberated by wisdom, a body witness, 1 attentive view, 1 liberated by faith, a Dhamma follower, and a faith follower. So what we see here is an alternative way of the Buddha to describe the path to arahantship. So an alternative way of classifying the people who are noble people, the Aryan people. So usually, what we usually associate with the noble people is the 4 pairs of persons, or the 8 kinds of individuals. Usually we know that as stream entry, once return, non-return, and arahantship. Or if we break them up into pairs, then the path and fruit of the respective attainment. So the path of stream entry, the fruit of stream entry, the path of one's return, the fruit of one's return, and the same for non-return and for arahantship. And the reason why this is the usual classification of the noble people why this is the most popular, the most well-known classification scheme, is because this is obviously in the daily recollections that people recite in Buddhist countries, and many people also recite daily in the West, where we recollect the triple gem. So the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And when we recollect the Sangha, then of course we recite this, like the 4 pairs of persons, the 8 kinds of individuals. This is the incomparable field of merit for the world, and so on. So this classification scheme, the usual classification scheme, stream entry, once return, non-return, and arahantship, has become the most well-known model to describe the pathway towards arahantship. But there are various other classification schemes that we find in the suttas. And these 7 kinds of persons that we are studying today is a different scheme, very different from the usual 4 groups of the Aryans. And again, I think this is very important to acknowledge that the standard version of the 4 groups is of course very famous, is also very useful, but it's not the only model that the Buddha has described, and it's not necessarily the way that everybody experiences the pathway to arahantship. There are other ways to experience it. The Buddha has taught other models, and one of these other models is what we are studying today. So what I want to do is I want to just read through all the 7 types first, and then we can discuss them in a little bit more detail. So the Buddha says, what kind of person is one liberated in both ways? Here some person contacts with the body and abides in those liberations that are peaceful and immaterial, transcending forms, and their taints are destroyed by their seeing with wisdom. This kind of person is called one liberated in both ways. I do not say of such a mendicant that they still have work to do with diligence. Why is that? They have done their work with diligence. They are no more capable of being negligent. What kind of person is one liberated by wisdom? Here, some person does not contact with the body and abide in those liberations that are peaceful and immaterial, transcending forms, but their taints are destroyed by their seeing with wisdom. This kind of person is called one liberated by wisdom. I do not say of such a mendicant that they still have work to do with diligence. Why is that? They have done their work with diligence. So here, the first 2 kinds of people, these are obviously both arahants, since the Buddha says their taints are destroyed, entirely destroyed, and they have no more work to do. Of course, there is a difference between the two. We will talk about this in detail in a few minutes. But what we note here in this classification scheme is even between arahants, there are differences. So even on the stage of arahantship, not everybody is the same. People still have different mental qualities. People still have different dominant faculties, even on the level of arahantship, let alone why they practice towards arahantship. And then the text continues. What kind of person is a body witness? Here, some person contacts with the body and abides in those liberations that are peaceful and immaterial, transcending forms. And some of their taints are destroyed by their seeing with wisdom. This kind of person is called a body witness. I say of such a mendicant that they still have work to do with diligence. Why is that? Because when that venerable one makes use of suitable resting places and associates with good friends and nurtures their spiritual qualities, they may, by realizing for themselves, with direct knowledge, here and now enter upon and abide in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the home life into homelessness. Seeing this fruit of diligence for such a mendicant, I say that they still have work to do with diligence. What kind of person is one attained to view? Here, some person does not contact with the body and abide in those liberations that are peaceful and immaterial, transcending forms. But some of their taints are destroyed by their seeing with wisdom, and they have reviewed and examined with wisdom the teachings proclaimed by the Tathagata. This kind of person is called one attained to view. I say of such a mendicant that they still have work to do with diligence. Why is that? Because when that venerable one makes use of suitable resting places and associates with good friends and nurtures their spiritual faculties, they may, by realizing for themselves, with direct knowledge, here and now enter upon and abide in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the home life into homelessness. Seeing this fruit of diligence for such a mendicant, I say that they still have work to do with diligence. What kind of person is one liberated by faith? Here, some person does not contact with the body and abide in those liberations that are peaceful and immaterial, transcending forms. But some of their taints are destroyed by their seeing with wisdom, and their faith is planted, rooted, and established in the Tathagata. This kind of person is called one liberated by faith. I say of such a mendicant that they still have work to do with diligence. Why is that? Because when that venerable one lives in a suitable place, associates with good friends, develops their spiritual faculties, then they can attain arahantship. Seeing this fruit of diligence for such a bhikkhu, I say that they still have work to do with diligence. So now here we have three kinds of people. These three kinds are the body witness, the one attained to view, and the one liberated by faith. These are people that have already some of their taints destroyed, but not all of the taints, so they still have work to do. And that means, in the usual classification scheme, that means since some of their taints are destroyed, since they have broken some of the fetters, they are at least stream enterers. So here, those three kinds of people are on the level between stream entry and below arahantship. So in the usual classification scheme, this refers to the stream enterers, the once-returners, and the non-returners. In the usual classification scheme, this is our hierarchical scheme. So the stream enterer at the bottom, then the once-returner above, and then the non-returner on the top, and of course, arahant at the very top. But here, those three kinds of people that we see here, these are not hierarchical. These are just three parallel pathways to arahantship for three different kinds of people with three different kinds of dominant faculties, dominant spiritual faculties. So the faith faculty, the wisdom faculty, and the samadhi faculty. We will go through this in much more detail in a minute as soon as we have read the entire text. But we already note that for arahants, there are two different kinds. For the people in between stream entry and below arahantship, there are three different kinds. And then we have two more kinds of people, and the Buddha says, what kind of person is a Dhamma follower? Here, some person does not contact with the body and abide in those liberations that are peaceful and immaterial, transcending forms. And their taints are not yet destroyed by their seeing with wisdom. But those teachings proclaimed by the Tathagata are accepted by them after reflecting on them sufficiently with wisdom. Furthermore, they have these qualities: the faith faculty, the energy faculty, the mindfulness faculty, the concentration faculty, and the wisdom faculty. This kind of person is called a Dhamma follower. I say of such a bhikkhu, of such a mendicant, that they still have work to do with diligence. Why is that? Because when that venerable one lives with good friends in a good environment and develops the faculties, then they can attain arahantship. Seeing this fruit of diligence for such a mendicant, I say that they still have work to do with diligence. And what kind of person is a faith follower? Here, some person does not contact with the body and abide in those liberations that are peaceful and immaterial, transcending forms. And their taints are not yet destroyed by their seeing with wisdom. Yet they have sufficient faith and love for the Tathagata. Furthermore, they have these qualities: the faith faculty, the energy faculty, the mindfulness faculty, the concentration faculty, and the wisdom faculty. This kind of person is called a faith follower. I say of such a mendicant that they still have work to do with diligence. Why is that? Because when that venerable one makes use of suitable resting places and associates with good friends and nurtures their spiritual faculties, they may, by realizing for themselves with direct knowledge here and now, enter upon and abide in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the home life into homelessness. Seeing this fruit of diligence for such a bhikkhu, I say that they still have work to do with diligence. So now here we have two kinds of people, the Dhamma follower and the faith follower. And these two are people who are already noble people. That means they are on, like in the other classification scheme, we would say that they are on the path to stream entry. But they have not broken through to stream entry yet. We know that they haven't broken through yet because the description here says their taints are not yet destroyed by seeing with wisdom. So they haven't broken any fetters yet. So the defining feature of stream entry obviously is that you break the first three fetters, which is identity view, attachment to rites and rituals, and doubt. So once you break these three, that is equivalent to being a stream enterer. So here, in this case, those two kinds of people, the Dhamma follower and the faith follower, have not destroyed any taints yet. They have not broken any fetters yet. So we know they are below stream entry. But they're already noble people. They're already fixed on the path. And here again, we see that there are two different kinds of people with two different kinds of dominant faculties, a faith faculty and a wisdom faculty, respectively. So when we look at the overall scheme of the 7 people, then we see that below stream entry, we have two kinds of people. Between stream entry and just below arahantship, we have 3 different kinds of people, 3 parallel pathways, basically. And then at arahantship, there are 2 different kinds of arahants with 2 different kinds of qualities and 2 different kinds of dominant faculties. So let's go through all these different types in a little bit more detail. And I would like to start from the bottom. So we will start by exploring the faith follower and the Dhamma follower, and then slowly building up towards arahantship. So we see at the bottom there are the faith followers and the Dhamma followers. Both of these people are described as someone who does not contact with the body and abide in those liberations that are peaceful in immaterial, transcending forms. So this is, of course, a description of the immaterial attainments, which are very deep samadhi attainments above the fourth jhana. So both of these kinds of person, the faith follower and the Dhamma follower, do not have the immaterial attainments. So this is the attainment, infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception, and the cessation attainment. So we note there's nothing said about the four jhanas. So they may have jhanas, they may not have jhanas, but definitely they don't have those very deep samadhi attainments, the immaterial attainments. And both of them have not yet destroyed any of the taints, as we mentioned, since they're not stream entrers yet. And we note also that the description is that the taints are destroyed through seeing with wisdom. So whatever is your dominant faculty, whether that's a faith faculty or a samadhi faculty or a wisdom faculty, all kinds of types only destroy the taints through seeing with wisdom. So even faith types and samadhi types don't destroy the taints through their faith or through their samadhi practices, but all of them need to develop sufficient amount of wisdom to actually destroy the taints. The destruction of the taints can only happen through wisdom practices or through deep insight into reality as it actually is. So insight obviously is another word for wisdom. And then now we come to the difference between the Dhamma follower and the faith follower. For the faith follower, that person is described as somebody who has sufficient faith and love for the Tathagata. Whereas the Dhamma follower is described as somebody who accepts the teachings proclaimed by the Tathagata after reflecting on them sufficiently with wisdom. So for the follower, their practice mainly is based on a very strong attraction, very strong faith, very strong confidence, and an emotional attraction, like a positive emotional connection with the Buddha, the Tathagata, as a person. So for them, devotional practices, for example, are very, very helpful, or practices that bring up that have a strong emotional connection, strong positive feelings, a lot of inspiration, and that center on the person of the Buddha. Those are good practices for a faith follower. Whereas for a Dhamma follower, these are people who don't focus on the Buddha as a person. They focus on the Dhamma, on the teachings, and try to investigate with the rational mind, and they try to contemplate the teachings, the Dhamma principles, instead of focusing on the Buddha as a person. So the faith follower, as the name already says, has a dominant faith quality and focuses on the person of the Buddha. And the Dhamma follower has a dominant wisdom quality and contemplates the teachings, tries to understand the teachings. So one of them has more an emotional approach to the practice, and the other one has a more rational approach to the practice. But both of these practices are entirely valid. Both of them are really valuable pathways. And it's not that one practice is better than the other. It's just that people are different. And for some people, the rational pathway is more suitable. And for other people, this devotional pathway is more suitable. So it's important to know which type one is, so that one can select the practices properly, and that so that also as a teacher, it's important to see what types one's students are, so people can be given the proper advice for their respective type. And also as a student, it's important that we pick our teachers skillfully, so that the teacher actually has experience with the kind of type that we are and can actually skillfully guide us in our practice. And then we see that both the Dhamma follower and the faith follower, they have the 5 spiritual faculties, which are listed here: the faith faculty, the energy faculty, the mindfulness faculty, the concentration faculty, and the wisdom faculty. And of course, they need to have these 5 spiritual faculties because that's a function of the noble people. If you didn't have those 5 spiritual practices, you wouldn't be a faith follower or a Dhamma follower. You would just be an ordinary person, not a noble person. You wouldn't be on the path to stream entry yet. But since these people have those 5 spiritual qualities or the 5 faculties, they can be considered on the path to stream entry, or can be properly considered Dhamma followers and faith followers. And so the Buddha obviously says these kind of people still have work to do with diligence. Since they're not arahants yet, they still have all the fetters there. They're still bound to samsara. So clearly they need to be diligent and do their practice. And then the Buddha describes also the circumstances that they need to have in order to make progress on the path. So the Buddha says such a person needs to make use of suitable resting places, associate with good friends, and nurture their spiritual faculties. And if they do that, then they can make progress on the path to arahantship. So we note that there are certain conditions that need to be in place for us to make progress on the path. And to some extent, that's within our control, and to some extent, that's internal work that we are doing, such as the development of the 5 spiritual faculties. That's obviously internal. But also, there are external conditions that need to come together to support us in our practice. And here the Buddha says, making use of suitable resting places and associating with good friends. So having a suitable environment, a suitable resting place obviously means an environment that supports us in our practice. The material conditions need to be in place for us to be actually able to focus on the practice. So for the monastics, that usually refers to our 4 requisites. The 4 requisites are robes or clothing to cover the body, food to be healthy and strong, and maintain the body, not to let the body die, since we need the body for our practice. And then suitable accommodation, and also medicinal requisites in case of illness. So here, obviously, the Buddha mainly focuses on the resting place. So it's a little bit more geared towards the accommodation, but I think everything comes together here. A suitable resting place is also a place that provides the 4 requisites to monastics or for lay people, that sort of maintains their life without too much hard work and distraction, so that there is a chance to actually focus on the Dhamma. And so a suitable resting place, usually that is a place that not only provides the 4 requisites, but is also relatively calm, relatively peaceful, with not too many external distractions, so that we don't need to worry about too many external things and have a lot of time to do the practice. And also, the Buddha mentions the importance of having good friends, associating with good friends. So I think this, again, is an external factor that is extremely helpful on the path. If you associate with people who are also Dhamma practitioners, then there's a good energy. You can support each other. If they are teachers, then you can get teachings. That's of course great. If they are not teachers, just having like-minded people around is already very supportive. For example, if one day you don't feel all that motivated to sit down and meditate, but you see everybody else is meditating and they're not distracting you, so you don't have anything else to do, then it's kind of natural that your mind will also incline to sitting down and being quiet. And when you see everybody else being diligent, then you also don't want to distract them. You don't want to create a disturbance or a conflict. So there's some kind of a group kind of pressure, peer pressure, to also practice. So spiritual friends are extremely helpful on the path. Whereas, for example, if you live with people who are not Buddhist and who don't want to practice and who constantly socialize and make noise and have a lot of distractions and a lot of things going on, then that will constantly pull your consciousness or your mind away from stillness and away from your practice towards the samsaric world. And that will create a lot of disturbance in your mind. And that is not a helpful environment. And those are not the kind of good friends that you should associate with if you're interested in further developing your practice. But if both the external and the internal factors come together, so a suitable environment, good friends or good people, and the internal development of the 5 faculties, then we can make progress towards arahantship. And that's, again, that is the same for all kinds of people, whether that's the faith-based people or the wisdom-based people. So now those 2 people, the faith follower and the Dhamma follower, develop on the path. They make the breakthrough to stream entry, and then they turn into one of the other 3 people. So they turn either into one liberated by faith, one attained to view, or a body witness. So let's go through these 3 kinds of people and see what they are. So let's start with the one liberated by faith. Here, this is a person who does not contact the immaterial attainments. So they don't have the deep samadhi states. They don't attain those immaterial states above the 4th jhana. So again, they don't have a dominant samadhi faculty. But some of their chains are destroyed by their seeing with wisdom, of course, since they are stream enterers. Since they are at least stream enterers, at least 3 of their fetters are already broken. They could also be once returners or non-returners, as I mentioned before. If they're non-returners, then 5 of their fetters are already broken. And the description of those liberated by faith is that their faith is planted, rooted, and established in the Tathagata. So again, we see that this is somebody who focuses strongly on the person of the Buddha. And the dominant faculty, of course, as the name says, is still this faith-based practice. The dominant faculty is the faith faculty. And then the same stock passage describes that the practices that they're still doing, they're still associating with good people, living in a good environment, and developing the 5 faculties, and may eventually be able to break through to arahantship. This is the person with the dominant faith faculty. Then there is the person that is called one attained to view. So this is, again, a person that does not have the immaterial attainments. So again, they don't have a dominant samadhi faculty. But some of their chains are destroyed, of course, we know, since they've broken through to stream entry. And they have reviewed and examined with wisdom the teachings proclaimed by the Tathagata. So this ties in nicely with what we've just seen with the Dhamma follower, who was also a person who was focusing more on the Dhamma principles, contemplating, studying, investigating the principles of Dhamma, rather than focusing on the Buddha as a person. And then they do exactly the same practices as the others with good external and internal conditions. And then they might be able to break through to arahantship. And then we have the body witness. And the body witness, now this is a person who does have the immaterial attainments. That means infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception, and the cessation attainment, so the very, very deep samadhi attainments. So here, finally, we have a person that does have very, very deep samadhi. This is a person with a dominant samadhi faculty. And also in their case, some of their chains are destroyed by seeing with wisdom. So that means, again, they are in between stream entry and non-return, or below arahantship. And again, they practice in exactly the same way as the others and may be able to attain arahantship at some point. So how do we understand that there are, in the beginning, 2 kinds of people, the faith follower and the Dhamma follower, and they then develop into 3 kinds of people, which then again converge on 2 kinds of arahants, the one who is liberated by wisdom and the one who is liberated both ways. And I think some of these are probably fairly clear and some of these are a little bit more complex. And I think for the faithful, let's start with the faith follower. Once the faith follower breaks through to stream entry, they will probably straight away become a person who is liberated by faith. Since the faith follower is somebody who focuses on the person of the Buddha, makes the breakthrough to stream entry then. And the one liberated by faith is also one who is focusing mainly on the person of the Buddha and also has a dominant faith quality. This is kind of the natural progression, how they would develop on the path. For the Dhamma follower, it's also kind of easy to see how there is a natural progression. The Dhamma follower is somebody who investigates all the Dhamma teachings. They have a dominant wisdom quality. And once they break through to stream entry, they would turn into a person that is attained to view. Since the person who is attained to view also has the dominant wisdom quality and is doing those practices that are investigations and examinations of the teachings of the Buddha. So that that progression is fairly clear and fairly natural. But the question is, where does the body witness come from? And I think in order to understand where that ties in, we should look at the two kinds of arahants first, and then understand a little bit better what is going on. And so for the two kinds of arahants, there is the one liberated by wisdom and the one liberated in both ways. The one liberated by wisdom is somebody who does not have the immaterial attainments. So they may have the 4 jhanas, and in fact, it's actually quite clear they need to have at least one of the jhanas in order to be an arahant. But that's not actually mentioned here. That's mentioned in other suttas. So I don't want to have a discussion about jhanas at the moment. I just want to say that they don't have the immaterial attainments. But their attains are destroyed by seeing with wisdom, of course, otherwise they wouldn't be arahants. And this kind of person is one called liberated by wisdom. So the one liberated by wisdom, again, has a dominant wisdom quality, not a dominant samadhi quality. And the other kind of person is called liberated both ways. This is a person that has the deep immaterial, the deep samadhi attainments, the immaterial attainments, and also, of course, enough wisdom to break all the fetters and destroy all the taints. So the difference between the two is the one liberated both ways has a strong samadhi quality, whereas the one liberated by wisdom has a strong wisdom quality. So what we see here is that there is no arahant that has a strong faith quality. So the faith quality in and of itself is not sufficient to take you all the way to arahantship. So the person who is in between stream entry and non-return and is called a person liberated by faith eventually needs to develop that faith quality in another direction and eventually needs to focus a little bit more either on the samadhi attainments or on the wisdom attainments. So they kind of need to switch over either to becoming one attentive view or to becoming a body witness, so that they can then develop into either the arahant that has a dominant wisdom faculty or an arahant that has a dominant samadhi faculty, since faith alone is not sufficient. And for the others, it's quite clear. The person with a dominant wisdom faculty who is one attentive view will develop usually into an arahant who is liberated by wisdom. The body witness who has a dominant samadhi quality will usually develop into an arahant who is liberated both ways. But the person who is liberated by faith needs to somehow switch over into one of the other two types. And in some ways, it's a little bit easier for a faith type to develop strong samadhi to develop a dominant samadhi faculty rather than developing a dominant wisdom faculty. But it seems that it's like that both ways would be possible. And the reason why the faith quality is somewhat closer to the samadhi quality than to the wisdom quality is that the kinds of practices that they are doing, these faith-based practices, they are described as having a strong love for the Tathagata. So they have a strong emotional a positive emotional connection to the practice. And those positive emotional connections, obviously, this has a lot to do with piti and sukha. And piti and sukha, so happiness and joy, these are obviously samadhi factors. So it makes it easier to actually develop deep samadhi. And also the kinds of devotional practices that they do make it somewhat easier to develop one-pointedness of mind. So kind of deep samadhi practices. So for example, if you visualize the Buddha, or if you recite the mantra Buddho, Buddho, or focus on the Buddha in some other way, the mind can become very single-minded, very one-pointed, and then it's much easier to slip into samadhi. So the kinds of practices that they do make it somewhat easy to cultivate good samadhi. They wouldn't normally tend to doing practices that are very, very active, lots of investigations and contemplations that they would need to do if they wanted to cultivate a wisdom quality. But of course, it's not impossible. There are probably also people who switch over to a dominant wisdom quality. But the most straightforward thing of developing from a faith type further on the path is developing into a samadhi type. We have seen this a little bit last time already. Of course, last time we had looked at this whole thing from an entirely different angle. But last time in the classification scheme that we saw, we also had samadhi types, we had wisdom types, and we had the faith types. And there were samadhi types that went all the way to arahantship. There were wisdom types that went all the way to arahantship. But then there were the faith types. Their practice was described as somebody who has a lot of faith in the practice, but their progress is somewhat blocked. Their meditation isn't really going anywhere. They have a lot of defilements, especially restlessness was mentioned there. But eventually there's an outside trigger that makes their mind converge, and they are able to make the breakthrough. And of course, when that breakthrough happens, then it depends in some way on the practices that they have done, on the seeds that they bring from the past. What would happen then if they make a breakthrough to deep insights and wisdom and attain arahantship that way, or if they make a breakthrough and the mind converges into samadhi to a very strong extent and they attain the immaterial attainments. So for the faith type, it's a little bit, I think, variable how they could develop further. I think it's more likely that they would develop into a samadhi type, but it's not impossible for them to also develop into a wisdom type. Last time if you remember the testimonials that we read of those two, the bhikkhu and the bhikkhuni, they didn't really specify exactly what happened when they made that breakthrough. So we don't really know which kind of type they develop into in the end. But yeah, I think, as I mentioned, it's somewhat more likely to develop into a samadhi type than into a wisdom type, since both faith and samadhi have very similar prerequisites. And both of them actually tend towards calmness and quietness of the mind, whereas the wisdom practices tend towards mental activities, and all these investigation practices that wisdom types do make the mind, or keep the mind, a little bit more active than what the samadhi types would need, or what their practice would be like. So I see that we have already spent 45 minutes talking about these 7 types, so I think I should start wrapping up and answer a few questions. So to recap, we have just looked at 7 kinds of persons. 2 people below the threshold of stream entry, then 3 people in between stream entry and below arahantship, and then 2 people at the level of arahantship itself. And we see that for the wisdom types, the progression is quite clear, from a Dhamma follower to one attained to view, to one liberated by wisdom. For the faith types, they would develop from a faith follower into one liberated by faith, and then they could potentially develop into a body witness and into one liberated both ways. Or there is also a chance for them to develop into one attained to view and then one liberated by wisdom. So the pathways are different, of course, and I think it's very important to acknowledge that different people have these different pathways. And I hope that maybe you got an impression or got an idea what kind of type you are, because obviously if you are a Dhamma follower or more on the wisdom side, then doing a lot of contemplations and doing a lot of investigation of Dhamma principles, this kind of practice is entirely different, or is to some extent quite different. Maybe not entirely different, but to some extent quite different from the faith follower or the faith-based practices that are very devotional and that focus on the Buddha as a person, and that where the motivation to practice and the progress on the path depends very much on an emotional, positive emotional component, whereas the Dhamma follower practices more with a more detached, rational, non-emotional approach. So I hope that you have an idea which type you are and have an idea which kind of practices might be suitable for you. And at this point, I will end today's sutta discussion. And I see that there are quite a few comments in the live chat. So I will see if I can answer a few questions. So Buddha Ruchi says, extraordinary. Yesterday, by coincidence, a monk friend and teacher of mine were discussing wisdom vis-a-vis Samadhi as a requirement for entering the path. Yeah, sometimes it seems like coincidence, but there's also the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So maybe you were just ready to hear these kind of teachings. So they all come your way now because your mind is ready, and this might be something that, this might be a hint for you that this is something that you should explore further a little bit. So yeah, I'm glad that maybe this is something that was helpful for you today. I don't know. And Buddha Ruchi also continues. Bhante said that while Samadhi can bring us forward, so to speak, panya, I think this means panya, not punya, panya is necessary, panya means wisdom, is necessary and sufficient quality for enlightenment. Yeah, I think this is very clear in this sutta also. No matter which is your dominant faculty, it's always, for every single type, it is said that the taints are destroyed through seeing with wisdom. So even if you're a Samadhi type or a faith type, you still need to have some kind of wisdom. So all the types need to develop the 5 spiritual faculties to some extent. It's just that one faculty is the dominant one that propels you forward on the path. But all the 5 faculties, faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, need to be developed to a good extent for all the kinds of types. And wisdom is the one thing that really breaks the fetters. Samadhi or faith cannot break the fetters. They can help you to develop, like to make your wisdom, to empower your wisdom, but in and of themselves, they're not sufficient for breaking through, for breaking fetters, or for becoming enlightened. And Gita has a question that isn't really related to the sutta. So I will just answer this very briefly. Are vitamins considered medicinal requirements like vitamin C? Yes. Vitamins help to keep the body healthy. So anything that may be, like in the Vinaya, the medicine is a very, very broad category. Even food can sometimes be medicine. So yeah, all kinds of supplements can be considered under the requisite of medicine. Gita says, what can lay people offer to the Mahasanga for medicine? Again, this is going away from the sutta, so I will be very brief. They can offer anything from like the standard Western medicines to traditional Asian medicines to food supplements to healthy, just offering healthy food to the Sangha is already extremely healthy and will help to prevent illnesses from developing. So any kind of things that also prevent illnesses can come under the requisite of medicine. And Gita says, Aya, can one have both faith and wisdom Dhamma investigation faculty? So as I just mentioned, yes, everybody who is a noble person has the 5 faculties. Like this is kind of synonymous. You can only be a noble person if you have, to some extent, the 5 spiritual faculties, which are faith, energy, mindfulness, samadhi, and wisdom. But you will have most people will have one dominant faculty. So yes, everybody can have and should have both faith and wisdom and the other 3 faculties, but it's important to know which one is your dominant one so you can choose your practices skillfully. And if you do practices that support your dominant faculty, then the progress on the path will be much more smooth and much easier because you're already good at what you're doing, because you already have that mental quality, and then your practice will be more easy. If you do practices that do not tie in with your dominant quality, let's say you're a Dhamma investigator type, and you keep on doing devotional practices, then you would just get bored, and you feel annoyed, and you don't see the sense of what you're doing, and you feel like this is not helpful to you. So you can create an obstacle on your path, and your practice will become boring. And often, if your practice isn't that strong yet, you will lose interest and you just do something else, and then the path is blocked entirely. So by knowing which type you are, it's just much easier for you to practice. That's why we are trying to figure out which type you are. That's why we're having this mini series, so that we can try to figure out which kind of things would be helpful for us personally. So Gita says, Gita has so many questions today. I think I have to go a little bit faster because I see that there are so many questions still left. Aya, is there a purpose in practicing the immaterial states of meditation? Our understanding is that we do not need the immaterial states to break through to the path and fruits. Yeah. Well, it depends on which type you are. If you are a Samadhi type, then they are probably necessary for you. Because if you are a Samadhi type, then your wisdom faculty is comparatively weak. And that means if your wisdom faculty is a little bit weak, it's difficult for you to see all the defilements and to see all the Dhamma principles and to see how it all links together and to understand dependent origination and all these kind of things. So your mind needs to be extremely calm for your fairly weak wisdom faculty to actually be able to see clearly. If your mind is still a little bit stirred up, then these small turbulences will be enough to obscure your internal vision, and because your wisdom faculty is not strong enough. So if you are a Samadhi type, it is probably necessary for you to make the mind so calm, like as to attain the immaterial states, in order for your wisdom to be able to see things as they actually are. That's why the Buddha says the Samadhi types usually have the immaterial attainments even before they become Arahants. But they are not necessary. Like there are many kinds of people who don't need the immaterial attainments, like for example, the wisdom types. their wisdom faculty is the dominant faculty, so their wisdom is fairly strong. So the mind doesn't need to be quite as calm to make the breakthrough to arahantship, so they don't need to develop the immaterial states. So there are lots and lots of people who don't need to practice the immaterial states of meditation. Anyway, my suggestion is to develop the jhanas first and see if you attain arahantship with that. And if not, then just keep on practicing, and the immaterial states will come all by themselves as you keep on practicing. So don't worry too much. Just do your practice. And Kumu says, Aya is the difference between 4 jhanas and the 4 immaterial attainments. The developmental level of the mental faculty. Guess the 4 jhanas are absolutely necessary for immaterial attainments. Yes. So the immaterial attainments are developed based on the 4th jhana. So obviously you need to develop the 4 jhanas first to a good degree of mastery before you can start developing the immaterial attainments, because they are based on the 4th jhana. And AS says, all these different classifications are these classifications put forth to help people understand where they are on the path, what is behind them, and what is ahead. Yes, they're kind of like a roadmap. Like, let's say you want to go from one place to another, and there are 5 cities in between. Then you have to reach city number 1 first, then you have to reach city number 2, then city number 3. And if you have passed city number 2 and you don't reach city number 3, then probably you have either stopped progressing, or you have gone astray and you have gone lost in the woods. And then you need to turn around and find your way back to the path. So they are there to guide people, to kind of let them know what to expect. And also the different classifications are there so that people understand that everybody is different and that there are individual approaches to the path. And often there are people who say, well, I have this amazing method. It works so great. Everybody should practice my one method. And then there is another person comes along and says, well, I tried this method. It didn't work at all. And then we start looking down on that person and saying, well, this person is stupid. They can't even do this simple method. Or the other person thinks like, they gave me this really stupid method. It doesn't work at all. They don't know what they're talking about. So there's a lot of conflict, and it can lead to a lot of confusion if we don't understand that there are different pathways and that people are different and that not every method works for every person. So that is why we need all these different classifications. And it's why it's also important that we learn a lot about ourselves, our own mind, and we take responsibility for our own path, because other people may be more advanced on the path, but they might have a different mental setup. So what the kind of practices that they have done, what they have practiced, may not necessarily be exactly the same thing as what we ourselves need to do. And Sud says, Dear Venerable, if someone practices the Eightfold Path with fidelity, attends Dhamma lectures, practices meditation, and keeps their precepts, then they are either a faith or a Dhamma follower. Is that right? Well, it depends. A faith or a Dhamma follower is somebody who is already a noble person. So they are guaranteed, in another sutta that we haven't read today, it says that they are guaranteed to attain stream entry in this very life, at the very latest at the point of death in this life. So they are already considered noble people. They are already on the path to stream entry. And the defining feature of a noble person is that they have the 5 spiritual faculties, which are the faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom faculty. So these are really the things we need to focus on. We need to try and develop. And I think the practices that you've mentioned here, they are really good for developing them. So practicing Eightfold Path, attending lectures, meditation, keeping precepts, and so on. So if you do that, definitely that is a good way to eventually become a faith or a Dhamma follower. But maybe not every single person who is doing this is already a Dhamma or a faith follower. It depends on how strong your commitment is to the practice and how strong you have these 5 spiritual faculties. So yeah, it's a little bit difficult, obviously, to say whether you are already a faith or a Dhamma follower or not yet, because you haven't broken any fetters. So you wouldn't really know if you're already there or not. Usually this is something you only know in hindsight. Once you've broken through to stream entry, you know that just before you were a Dhamma follower or a faith follower. But while you're a Dhamma follower or a faith follower, you don't really know that. And there's also a sutta where the Buddha says he didn't really want to teach about these kind of things because it makes people lazy once they know that they are already guaranteed to attain stream entry in that life. Or once they know that they are already guaranteed to attain arahantship within the next 7 lives, they don't want to practice anymore, and all the defilements take over and they become lazy. So the Buddha was quite hesitant to teach about these things. But eventually people started asking questions, and then he answered the questions. And that's how he started giving teachings about this. So the best thing is to not take anything for granted and just keep on practicing so that you don't fall into the trap of becoming lazy. And Buddha Ruchi says, may we say that at the point of entry to arahantship, one has attained ultimate samadhi and ultimate wisdom. It depends on what you mean by ultimate samadhi and ultimate wisdom. So even arahants have different levels of wisdom. So for example, Sariputta was the one foremost in wisdom. He had a lot more wisdom than many of the other monks. So you need enough wisdom to break all the fetters. So we can say at the point of entry to arahantship, you have enough wisdom to break all the fetters, and you have enough samadhi to support that wisdom practice. But it's not necessarily ultimate in the sense that there's nothing higher. Like the Buddha had higher wisdom than all of the other monks, even though the monks were arahants, or the monks and nuns, the monastics were arahants. And ultimate samadhi also, again, an arahant has at least some of the jhanas, but not necessarily all the immaterial attainments. So there is a potential for developing deeper samadhi, but not everybody needs that much samadhi. So yeah, but they have enough for arahantship, that's for sure. And Buddha Ruchi says, I have to admit that my mind boggles at all this division and subdivision. That's why we are going through this. I hope I made it a little bit clearer. And of course, there's always the recording, so it may be helpful to go through this slowly again. And sometimes it can be helpful to take notes. When I was just starting out with all of this, I had a lot of notes trying to understand this and piece it all apart and then put it all back together. I personally thought it was really worthwhile studying this, but of course people are different. And I think for the wisdom types, these kind of things are really interesting, trying to contemplate and investigate all these Dhamma principles. For the faith-based types, I know that this might be a challenge. And Pial and Indira Valpola ask, in the fourth type in AN 4.170, so this is the sutta we read last time, the corruptions of insight, restlessness in regard to Dhamma achieving release, and conceit, overestimating oneself, do they correspond to the last 2 fetters before release? So I don't quite remember exactly how it was phrased in that sutta, but I think you could probably read it that way. So, but it's probably on kind of a lower level also, because the sutta says that they had a lot of faith, but kind of the practice was a little bit like it came to a stop. So they didn't really develop these they didn't really develop that deeply. Like what you're describing is a point where you're just before arahantship, because they're only like the fetters that refer to arahantship, the higher fetters left, like restlessness and conceit, for example. So it seems to me that what the sutta was describing is a state that is somewhat below that point. But yeah, I think there is definitely a connection between the two higher fetters that you mentioned and what is described for the faith type. But also, as we have seen today, the faith-based faculties do not take you all the way to arahantship. You have to switch over to a wisdom practice or to a samadhi practice eventually in order to become either an arahant liberated both ways or an arahant liberated by wisdom. There is no arahant liberated by faith alone. So a faith-based practice needs to be complemented at some point, of course, at a fairly high point on the path, but at some point it does need to be complemented with other practices. We still have so many questions. I really need to go a little bit faster. Buddha Ruchi says, Aya, could you perhaps also mention and discuss what I perceive to be a serious difference between knowing and knowing about the Dhamma by way of wisdom and panya? So I'm assuming that you mean knowing generally, like in daily life, and knowing about the panya, about the Dhamma, as in making a deep insight in your meditation practice. I hope I understand this correctly. So, of course, there is knowledge that we read in books and things that we just believe in and think that we know in our daily life. And then there's like the random kind of knowledge that doesn't lead us to liberation. And then there is the deep insights we make in our meditation when we deeply see for ourselves how the mind works, how when we can see things as they actually are, when we understand dependent origination, when we understand how our defilements bind us to samsara, how we are fettered by ignorance and craving, and these kind of things. That is the knowledge that is the actual profound knowledge that we need in order to make a breakthrough. So that is what panya in the Buddhist sense or wisdom refers to. It doesn't refer to random kind of worldly knowledge. So I think that was probably what you asked, what this question refers to. Hopefully, if not, maybe you can leave a comment. And then AS says, do the faculties become powers? Yeah, so of course, in many Buddhist teachings, for example, the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas, the 37 Wings to Awakening, we have two sets of the faculties. We have the 5 faculties and the 5 powers. And usually we would say that once you attain stream entry, what we call the 5 faculties is now called the 5 powers, because they have been developed to such an extent that they are really powerful and that they propel you forward on the path. So it's the same kind of 5 qualities, but because they are more strong, or they're stronger, we now call them powers instead of faculties. That distinction isn't absolute. So sometimes, even though somebody is already way beyond stream entry, they're still called the 5 faculties, such as in the sutta that we've read today. We have seen that they're still called the 5 faculties, not the powers. So in some ways, you could say that these are synonyms because they refer to the same mental qualities, but the word powers is usually only used if the person is already at least a stream entrer. Kuma says, this sutta also shows the power of faith, isn't it? Yeah, faith is an extremely important quality. No matter what type you are, whether you're a wisdom type, a samadhi type, or a faith type, faith is always extremely important. It's one of the 5 spiritual faculties. You need to have faith. And of course, that faith will become much stronger after you break through to stream entry, because stream entry removes all the doubts that you might have about the Buddha and his teaching in your mind. And for the faith-based types, obviously faith is the dominant faculty. So faith can propel you forward on the path very, very, very far. not all the way to arahantship probably, as we have seen today in the classification schemes, but very, very far. Even if you're not a faith type, still faith is one of the 5 faculties that you absolutely need to develop, and you need to have even as a wisdom type. Because if you don't have faith in the teaching, or let's say confidence in the teaching, then you have so much doubt that you constantly question, and your mind can't attain a reasonably peaceful state. So you can't actually deeply see into the things that are going on in your mind, because there's just too much turmoil and too many questions and too much doubt, and it creates a barrier for you to actually properly commit to the practice. So faith or confidence in the Buddha and his teaching is very important. So I see that there are 3 more questions, so I will take these 3 more questions, and if any more questions pop up, I will have to leave them for next time. Okay, one of them is actually not a question, I think. This is Buddha Ruchi saying, so the point is the breaking of the fetters, and these techniques are our methods of doing so. Got it. Yeah, that's exactly right. And last question for today is from Bobby. And Bobby says, how would I know what type I am? One moment to the next, I might change from wisdom to faith, for example. So usually people feel drawn to a particular way of practice. And usually people have a mental setup that inclines more towards one thing than to the other. For example, we have seen if you are a faith type, then when you think about practicing Buddhism, you feel drawn to the Buddha as a person. You feel a strong emotional connection with him as a person. You feel, in the sutta, it was called love for the Tathagata. So you have a positive attraction to the Buddha. When you do devotional practices, such as reflecting on the Buddha's good qualities, you gain a lot of piti sukha, so happiness and joy in your mind. You really enjoy doing all the chantings and what they do in Asian countries, like circumambulations of stupas and venerating of Bodhi trees. And you can spend all night doing services to the Sangha, and you really like these devotional kinds of practices. That is one type. Another type, what is here called the Dhamma follower, is a type that isn't really drawn to the Buddha as a person, but they are drawn to the principles of the Dhamma. So they like to think about the Dhamma. They like to really figure out all the details. They like to investigate. When they meditate, their mind tries to figure out looks at itself, tries to figure out how it all works, tries to figure out all the really complicated concepts like dependent origination and all the different fetters and all the different classifications that we have looked at today. So if your mind inclines more towards that, so just not the emotional approach, but the rational approach, for example, then that would mean that you're more a Dhamma follower than a faith follower. And of course, sometimes that can change from day to day or from time to time. So even like a wisdom practitioner will enjoy chanting from time to time, or they will enjoy doing some kind of devotional practices from time to time. And even a faith type will enjoy learning about various Dhamma principles from time to time. Of course, this isn't exclusive. So of course, even a faith type will need to learn the basic principles of Dhamma and sometimes look into things in a lot more detail. But generally, you should really get to know your own mind and see which side you incline to more. And then pick practices that are suitable for that. And if it really turns out that you keep on switching back and forth every day, then it's even more important that you get to know your own mind, because then you can look at your mind and see which faculty is dominant today, Do I feel like doing faith-based practices? Do I feel like doing wisdom-based practices? And then you choose your practice for that particular day, depending on the quality that you'll find in your mind on that particular day. So if you really switch back and forth, then it's even more important that you learn about the different types and what kind of practices are suitable for that. So finally, we have come to the last question for today. I'm glad we had such a nice discussion, and I hope you enjoyed today's sutta. Next time, we will continue our mini-series and talk about yet another different set of types of persons. And hopefully this was helpful for you. Hopefully you got some ideas what kind of type you are, and you got some ideas how you should build up your practice. And for today, we will finish with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I'll see you all either next Tuesday or next Thursday. Have a good day.